In a previous Unpacking Scholarship episode that I did, there was this nationwide survey by the Kapor Center, and they found that 39% of CS educators don't think we need to discuss equity in computer science classes. So my question is, do that 39% of CS educators who don't think we should discuss equity or inclusion feel that way because equity discussions come across as a form of colonization instead of a dialogue a la Paulo Freire? Now, if you're unfamiliar with what I mean by dialogue, specifically from a Freirean lens, check out the Unpacking Scholarship episodes that I did on that book. I think it was chapter 3 and 4 in particular that talk about dialogue. But an example that I might give is I've been a vegan for well over a decade now, and have heard many other vegans have some very strong arguments around why veganism is beneficial for personal health, why we should consider it in relation to animal rights, and lately, like why this is important in relation to climate change. Now, these well-intentioned vegans are often doing this to try and convince others about the benefits of it because they themselves have seen many benefits in maybe one of those 3 categories, or a different one I didn't mention. However, the way it comes across is it annoys people. And not only does it annoy some people, but it's literally an attack on others. So like, if you think of some of the vegans from a couple decades ago, like people at PETA, they would often literally throw blood on people. That is a physical attack on another individual. They don't know why they're having blood thrown all over them. They might have actually listened to and agreed with this person who is a vegan or from PETA or whatever, but because they physically assaulted them, they're likely not going to listen because the approach that they used was highly inappropriate and was very confrontational and did not initiate or continue some kind of a dialogue. It was literally just an attack. So some of my vegan friends who will look at another person and do the whole, "Oh, you're gonna eat that? Did you know?" and then go off on a rant about veganism. That, although not literally throwing blood on somebody, that still can come across as an attack on somebody because of how that conversation is initiated. If we want to get like more technical with it, it might come across as a form of colonization. It could be an axiological colonization, so colonizing the values. It could be ontological colonization, colonizing the ways of being. Now, let me tie this back into the point of this particular paper. So this paper is really focused on equity, and in particular, they're focused on equity in relation to race, gender, and socioeconomic status. At least those are the 3 primary things mentioned within here. Now, I want to be clear that my choice to be a vegan is very different than somebody's ethnicity, race, gender, socioeconomic status, etc. That's not a choice. However, what I'm trying to say is that there are, in my opinion, possibly some parallels with how the way we discuss equity and inclusion comes across as that annoying vegan trying to convince you why you should do things their way. So what I'm thinking out loud is, maybe it's not what we're striving for that's the problem, but it's how we are doing it. And I say this because I intentionally go and seek out discussions or media from people that I disagree with. So even though I'm an independent, I lean much heavily more towards liberal politics rather than conservative politics. So I intentionally seek out conservative viewpoints. And while I don't think that the vast majority of people in the United States disagree with the conversations around equity or inclusion, I think the way that it's presented can come across as colonization, whether it's through canceling or just Twitter bombing somebody or whatever. And to be explicit, yes, of course, there are racists in America, and there are transphobic, homophobic, etc., all types of phobias and isms going on in America. And they are highly problematic, and we need to stop that. But that being said, what perplexes me is why it's such a high percentage, that 39% of CS educators don't think we need to discuss equity. And I don't think it's just because 39% of CS educators are racists, even though there most certainly are racist computer science educators, not trying to diminish that fact. But this is just me thinking out loud. I don't actually know. I don't have any data to support this, but it's something that I've been intentionally engaging in conversations with other people who explore this work to try and figure out, well, why is it that 39% of CS educators don't think we need to talk about equity? And this is just my latest thought on that. Maybe it's the way that we are discussing it. So how you engage with a conversation with administrators on the importance of equity might have a huge impact on whether they are going to listen to you or not. But that's just a guess. So as a more explicit example, I previously did that Unpacking Scholarship episode talking about the Kapor Center's Culturally Responsive Sustaining Framework. And what I don't know is if that first practice, the one that's gotten the most attention from people, the one that is phrased as, quote, "The role of racism and white supremacy and its manifestation in computer science education is understood and acknowledged. Anti-racist practices and the decentering of whiteness are enacted within computer science courses and classrooms," end quote. Page 7. If the reason why is because for some people, maybe that 39% of people, I don't know, maybe it's coming across as colonization. Maybe it's the equivalent of somebody throwing blood on somebody wearing a fur coat, at least in that recipient's eyes. Not in my own, just to be clear, that's not how I feel. But that 39% of people, maybe some of them fall within that category. Maybe they agree if the wording was different, but because of how it's phrased, maybe it comes across as too political. And while I agree that any kind of educational act or pedagogy can be inherently political, yes, John Stapleton, I'm thinking of you right now in conversations we've had, I do still wonder if there are ways to engage in a Freudian dialogue that continues or starts the conversation rather than shuts people down. But I don't know, and I don't know how to do that super well yet. I'm working on it. So, for example, although I agree with the idea of decentering whiteness, what I don't know is if some people who aren't as up to date or engaged with discourse around equity and inclusion, if they see the words decentering whiteness and it comes across as an attack on their race. Having spoken to other CS educators, I do think for some of them, it does come across that way. For myself, as a white individual, it doesn't. I understand what the point is, and I agree with it. But if it was instead of phrased as decentering whiteness, if it was instead phrased differently, like about broadening participation or diverse representation, etc., maybe it would come across differently to people who are less engaged in this equity discourse. But again, these are just my own thoughts. I honestly don't know. I would love to see a follow-up study on that 39% to really dive deep into, well, why is it that you feel this way? Why don't you think we should discuss equity in CS education? Because it's important. But for them, maybe it's an attack. This excerpt of the CSKA podcast is from episode number 107, which is titled Preparing School Leaders to Advance Equity in Computer Science Education.